Our Torah portion for this week is Shlach Lecha. It's Numbers chapter 13. That's where it begins. So right at the beginning of the chapter, in the Eitz Chaim, it's on page 840 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash. And most of this Torah reading, in one way or another, deals with the catastrophe of the story of the scouts or the spies, however you want to call them, who were sent out to reconnoiter the promised land. We have to understand that the setup is that we are right on the edge, right on the threshold of entering Israel. Like, the story is almost over, actually. The way it should have been is the Torah should have basically finished in another, either in this Torah reading or the next. This should be it, finished. We get out of Egypt, we got to Mount Sinai, we hung around Mount Sinai, we left, and not too long afterwards, we get to Kadesh, and we are told that, okay, so look and see what's going on in the land there. Send 12 representatives, one from each tribe. Let them be major, machers in their tribe, and let them go and see what's going on in the land, and come back and give a report. So they, of course, do that, and their report is that however verdant and fruitful and abundant the land is in its produce and so on, it's a terrible place. It's a place that devours its inhabitants. The people there are giants, and they will squash us like cicadas. And it's suicide to go in there. And 10 of the scouts give that report. Only 2 people don't, Kalev and Joshua. The people are all swayed by the scouts' majority report. It goes viral, so to speak. And then everybody just says, no, God is out to murder us. And this was, a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy theory that this was all a setup in order to destroy us. And they refuse to go. And then, of course, God gets angry. And the consequence is the famous decree of 40 years of wandering in the desert, 1 year for every day that they were in there. They were in their mission for 40 days. So that's that. So that's like the famous part of the Torah story. When we get to the end of chapter 14, we have an episode that's part of the story that gets a little bit less attention, and that is that after that decree from God, there's a change of heart on the part of some of the people, and they say, "Oh, we sinned. This is terrible. We're going to go. Okay, we're ready, and we'll go, and we'll go and start invading." And Moses says, "No, you can't do it," and they don't listen, and they go in and they invade, and they get wiped out. So that's another part of this same episode. That brings us to the end of chapter 14. Then in chapter 15, we have a couple of legal sections that get interspersed with this Torah portion. And they are about different laws that apply once you enter the land. So all the commentators point out that there's this kind of like this irony here, that the decree is that the Israelites don't want to go into the land, so therefore they're not going to go into the land. But then the Torah continues by saying, and when you do get into the land, meaning the next generation, these are laws that you should follow. So we have the laws of libations for sacrifices and stuff like that. And then We have the law of challah, taking challah from bread. So it's like a truma. It's another example of giving like a first fruits or a little bit of your produce, to treat it as something holy and give it to God, or give it to the priest who stands in for God. And then we have another sacrificial law that keeps on different sacrificial laws that keep on being explained, and they're about expiating sins. So there's a kind of irony in fact in that. Then we get back to story, and the story that we have is the story of the Mekoshe Sheitzim, the wood gatherer. The wood gatherer gathers wood on Shabbat. It's taken for granted that that's a violation of Shabbat, but they don't know what the punishment is. What should we do with him? He gets thrown into custody, and then he's put to death. So we have that short little story. And then finally, the very last paragraph of the Torah reading is the paragraph about putting a tzitziot on the corners of your garment. So this is the mitzvah of tzitzis. We call the garment a talit. The word talit is a rabbinic word. It's not in the Torah, but the word tzitzit is. And it's about putting these tassels on the four corners of your garment. And that's the end of the Torah reading. So we have an interesting zigzagging with a lot of narrative, but also with a bunch of legal material as well. So the $1 million question: what do people want to focus on? What do people want to choose today to look at? Yes, Michael.
I'd like to hear your take on the spy story in light of
it's very interesting.
In light of contemporary sensibilities about nationalism and displacement and ties to a homeland and the importance of land in terms of national identity.
So, okay, so that's just, if you're asking me to give my opinion about something, that's one thing, but we're trying to do some Torah study. So let's see if we can do it, within the context of actually studying something in the Torah. But briefly, I allude to this a little bit in the Torah Sparks for this week, where I talk about the fact that this Torah reading gives us 3 examples where the Torah says, take ownership of something or take ownership of someone. And the first one is take ownership of the land. This land has been promised to you. Now I want you to go out there and I want you to own it. I want you to take it. So that's, the Torah has absolutely, it's very, very straightforward that God wants the Jewish people to, that's an anachronistic term, the children of Israel, to enter the land and do whatever it needs to be done in order to take possession of the land. So we can look at that a little bit in the text, and then, your question obviously is an important question, and it gets more and more important as we go into the rest of the sections of the Torah, the whole book of Deuteronomy, the whole conclusion, which of course is constantly presenting itself as being at the very brink of going into the land. And what do we do? And some of the stuff that we'll see in later Torah readings, which of course are very problematic and upsetting to all of us if we have any sense of decency. So yes, these are things that have to be struggled with, and we're going to keep on touching on it as we go along. So I don't feel like I have something to say that's going to solve anything for once and for all with regard to this Torah reading. But let's look into it as part of the lens that we should look through this text. Let's definitely pay attention to that. So anybody else have any other suggestions? Okay, so why don't we then at least give the text a little bit of a chance to speak before we have this, set of considerations that we, will bring up. Let's start from 841, verse 17. Let's start from 16. Okay, we'll start from 16, verse 16, chapter 13, verse 16. And who's going to read for us, please? All right, Geraldine, you got it. You have to unmute, please.
Okay. From the tribe, I'm sorry, 16?
Yeah.
Those were the names of the men whom Moses sent to scout the land. But Moses changed the name of Hosea, son of Nun, to Joshua.
Okay, so the word but is an interpretive translation. This is one of those vav examples where most of the time they leave it alone. They don't use the conjunction as the part of their translation. Here they decided that it's not and, but. Okay, but whatever it is, we take note of the fact that Moses, right at the beginning of this, it seems like, and of course some of the commentators actually say that that's not the case, but the way the text reads, Moses gives this extra present to Hosea by changing his name to Yehoshua. Okay, so Hosea is sort of, bring salvation, give us salvation, something like that. And Yehoshua is giving the name of God, putting the Hosea, the hey, instead of being a verbal component, for a verb, command kind of thing, it becomes instead part of God's name, Yehoshua. So Yeho is God's name. So God is the Savior. Okay. And, this is, of course, Jesus's name also, right, in a certain form. Okay, so anyway, so whether or not Moses has some kind of intimation or sense that this project that he's sending Joshua on requires him to get an extra blessing or something, is something to consider, but not for today. And here we go, 17.
When Moshe sent them to scout the land of Canaan, he said to them.
So again, the translation is when Moses sent them. The literal translation is, and Moses sent them. Right? Okay, go ahead.
Go up there into the Negev and on into the hill country and see what kind of country it is. Are the people who dwell in it strong or weak, few or many? Is the country in which they dwell good or bad? Are the towns they live in open or fortified? Is the soil rich or poor? Is it wooded or not? And take pains to bring back some of the fruit of the land. Now it happened to be the season of the first ripe grapes.
Right. So you have a little. What's that? Is that the ampersand? Is that the dash there? Is that what it is? So there's a little editorial note at the end. And by the way, the time of the season is when the grapes are first coming into ripening. It's a nice little comment. What are the things that Moses explicitly says they should watch for? What are the main concerns?
Fortified cities. What are the people like? How's the soil? How much forest is there?
So we could divide it up into two concerns. One concern is the lay of the land. Give us a sense. Remember, not a single person. These spies, these scouts, are the first people of Israel to see the promised land in generations. Right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived there. And then they go down, Jacob's sons go down. And then according to the way the Torah tells the story, of course, biblical scholars have other ideas, but the way the Torah presents the story, we have not seen this land for generations. They're going to be the first people to finally take this mythic land and take it in with their own eyes. So the first thing, and of course, how has God described this land? All the way back, God said it's Eretz Zavat Chalav Udavash, right? A land flowing with milk and honey. So God says this is a super wonderful, what I'm talking about. Oh, the nature in Chincoteague and in Assateague, it's so great, it's so wonderful. So that's been the prep, talk that has been passed down from generation to generation with the people. And now Moses says, give us a report. What does the land really look like? What is it really all about? Okay, so with your own eyes, right? And take back something. Bring us back some real evidence, some real material, evidence of the fruitfulness of the land. So that's the land category. The other category is, tell us about the inhabitants. What kind of people are they? What can you tell from looking at them, from looking at their civilization, from looking at their living conditions? And do they just live in idyllic kinds of little English countryside villages, or do they have fortified cities? So that's the people, right? So there's the land, and then there's the inhabitants. So coming back to Michael's point before, what I want to point out, fast forward to 1881, or a little bit before, and then after that, the last 150 years or so, when the Jewish people are preparing to come back into their land that was promised to them, and that none of them had seen, almost, right? For generations upon generations upon generations. One of the aspects of the Zionist revolution was connecting back to the land, right? One of them was, we're no longer going to be these Luftmenschen, we're not going to be these ghetto peddlers, we're not going to just live off money changing, we're not going to live off the good graces of whoever it is that's out there that can give us a couple of rubles, but we're gonna actually connect back to the land. So that was one major part of the Zionist revolution. Another part of the Zionist revolution was, what is the actual reality of this land in terms of its being occupied by people? And one of the famous sayings of the early Zionist movement was, and I forget who actually coined the saying, maybe somebody knows this: a land without a people for a people without a land. That was the way the Zionist dream was presented. Perfect. This is what a perfect match. This is an empty land with no inhabitants. And we have been yearning for our land for 2,000 years. And now we're going to be able to have this land, and it's not going to be at anybody's expense. This was one of the major ways that people thought about what was happening as they were preparing to uproot themselves and go to Israel. So this is in stark contrast to the consciousness that we have here exhibited by Moses, by the Torah. And it's not the first time that we have this, because we know already God has said there are 7 peoples in this land. There are many, many, other national groups, ethnicities, whatever you want to call them, that are there already. And Abraham, back when he was first there, says, "Ger v'toshav anochi emachem." You guys occupy the land, you own the land. I'm just a sojourner. I'm just an alien stranger. So the consciousness that we have here, when Moses says, scope out the people, how tough are they? How hard will it be to conquer their cities? And that's the implication, at least that's one of the obvious implications of do they have fortified cities, right? If we're going to have to conquer them, fortified cities are harder to conquer than open villages. So the awareness that there is a displacement going on is clear in the Torah. In the Zionist, evolution of seeing what was going on, this was actually a very big struggle to be aware of what was going on, to cope with the ethics and the politics and the economics of how you deal with all these other people that are in the land. That was a very fraught subject in Zionist struggles, and it continues to this very day. And the idea that yes, there are people there, and what do they deserve, and how should they be treated, and how do we relate to them, and can we have a home here with these other people there, or do we have to drive them out? Will they try to drive us out? That whole very, very painful struggle is happening to this very second, right, as I speak. And it divides the Israeli public, and it divides politicians and so on. So, but in the Torah, where we are now in this moment of history, for the Torah, it is obvious that the other peoples have to be either subdued, conquered, thrown out, or killed, not just defeated, in order for the Jewish people to have a home. So, as I say, this is not the first time that this concept has been brought up, but obviously it's pretty starkly, coming to the fore as they're right at the brink of going in. The book of Bamidbar, Numbers, from a couple of weeks ago when we started, how does it start? It starts with mustering troops. Starts with acknowledging that we're about to go to war. There's no two ways of it. We're not going in there and God gives us, the country, as a nature reserve that we then come back in, come into and benefit from. There's no question in the Torah that this will require fighting. So does that begin to address, Michael, some of what's on your mind?
Yeah, half of it. I mean, it addresses the idea of displacement and conquering of another people. But the other part of it is just the idea that a people need a homeland, that a people need a tie to land. And if you're going to be a nation, you have to have land. And if there happen to be other people, well, that's too bad for them. But but you can't be nomadic.
Right. Yeah. So that is absolutely taken for granted. And I want to hold on a second, please. Let's see where we go here. If I can, the problem is I have to remember. I have to remember things. That's one of the big problems of living, is that you have to remember things. And it's not easy. So hold on a second. what I'm looking for, if I don't find it, I'll have to wing it. But I don't want to wing it. I want to read the words, because the words are important. It's a Haftorah, and it's recent, so that's why I'm thinking that I should remember it. Halo kivnei chushiyim atem li. If you'll give me another half a second, I'm gonna find it. So, yeah, so where is this a Haftorah for? I want to, if you have the Eitz Chaim, this is Amos. This is Amos chapter 9. So how far back was this? Oh, it was in Kedoshim. Right? So the Haftorah for Kedoshim, right, which was like yesterday.
$693 is Kedoshim.
Right.
You have Torah.
It's 706. 706 in the Eitz Chaim. Amos chapter 9. And it starts here with verse 7. So you have it? Geraldine, you got it?
Okay. To me, O Israelites, you are just like the Ethiopians, declares the Lord. True, I brought Israel up from the land of Egypt, but also the Philistines from Caphtar and the Arameans from Kir.
Okay, so that's all I want to, and then he goes into a whole thing about sinful kingdoms and so on. So the idea being that the miraculous, relationship that we have with God, God took us out of Egypt. We remember it every day. We have major holidays that are commemorating this. Guess what, says God? You're not the only people that I've done this for. I've done this for other peoples. And this is the idea that comes back to Michael's point. The Torah understands that peoples need to have a home. I need, as an individual, I need to have a home. I need to have a circle of connections with other human beings that I care for, that care for me. I need to have a roof over my head, so that I can say the Shema at night with a sense of peace, right? B'shoch b'chov kumecha, put a mezuzah on your door, have a home. And this applies to peoples as well. And then the question is finding the spaces for all the different peoples. What the Torah says a million times over is that we all need a home, but we need
You froze, Rabbi.
what does God say? If you don't keep my commandments, I'm going to throw you out of your house. I'm going to throw you out of the land. And I'm being told that my internet connection is unstable. So
No, you
can you hear me?
froze.
I froze and now I'm back. So the point is, like I said, there is a very important moral component that the Torah puts forward in terms of having a home. And later on in Deuteronomy, spoiler alert, we'll find out that God is disgusted with the peoples that live in Canaan because they're so totally morally corrupt. We had it earlier in Kedoshim and in Achrei Mot, when we have the sexual relations prohibitions. God says, don't do what those people are doing. It's awful. This is what those people in the land are doing. They're completely defiling the land by these terrible behaviors. When God says to Abraham, your children will get the land, but you know what? The measure hasn't been filled. The measure of iniquity that those people are guilty of is not yet at the tipping point so that they deserve to be thrown out. So this is one part of the Torah's package of seeing all of this. And I think it's an important part to realize. And of course, people use that idea how they wish. So if you demonize every other person that's not you, then they don't deserve a homeland. They don't deserve to be considered a people. They don't deserve their human rights. They don't deserve to be treated equally. They don't deserve hot water, running water and sewers in their towns. And you can feel morally superior in trying to make their lives miserable. This is basically the from my perspective, this is basically the right-wing way of looking at things. The challenge of using the moral lens morally, which means that yes, if Hamas is shooting rockets at you, that's absolutely a war crime and a violation of everything human. But guess what? Just because they are the scum of the earth doesn't mean that we have an entitlement to be the scum of the earth also, just not quite as scummy. So the moral lens applies to everyone, and it applies to us, and that's what God says also. The difference is, and here's the tricky part, that as we go through with this, with this story, there's and we've had it already at the end of Leviticus. God says, I'll throw you out of the land, but I will never forget you. And when you repent, I'll bring you back. And that is not a story that we find being offered to everybody else, right? Everybody else is not the Canaanites, the Girgashites, the Chivites, all of these, the Hittites, all of the other 7 nations are not in this presentation warned. They don't have prophets that are running around going, get your act together or else you're going to really, feel God's wrath. So how do you explain that? I don't know. You can say history is written by the victors. We don't have the Canaanite Bible, so we don't know who their Canaanite Yeshayahu was. Or we can say there was no Canaanite Yeshayahu, and that's their tragedy, that they didn't have a Canaanite Yeshayahu, that they didn't have a Canaanite Amos. Coming back to today, our tragedy is that we don't have any more in a Jewish Israeli Yeshayahu or Amos. We've just got these apparatchiks and these political mediocrities that are really, really good at doing the zigzagging of politics, but who have basically no moral compass whatsoever. So we're in a lot of trouble from a biblical perspective. Yesterday, somebody said, I just want one day of being happy. The day is over. So if we could be happy yesterday, I don't think we have the luxury of being happy with our situation. Our situation is really challenging and bad. All right. Shall we continue, or any other comments? People want to respond? People want to bring up other perspectives on this? Okay. Let's continue then. So we're at 8:42.
21.
No, we're 8:42.
Right.
Yes, 21, verse 21. I thought you said 41. Sorry. 8:42, verse 21. Thank you.
They went up and scouted the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rehob at Lebo Hamath. They went up into the Negev and came to Hebron, where live Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the Anakites. Now Hebron was founded 7 years before Zoan of Egypt. They reached the Wadi Eshkol, and there they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes. It had to be borne on a carrying frame by 2 of them, and some pomegranates and figs. That place was named the Wadi Eshkol because of the cluster that the Israelites cut down there. At the end of 40 days, they returned from scouting the land. They went straight.
So let's stop for a second. Anybody have anything that they're noticing just in terms of the narrative of what they did, what they saw?
It doesn't address all of the questions. I mean, they are supposed to bring something back, and they do. That's the last thing they were instructed to do, but it doesn't really take them through discovering what the country is like, what the people are like. There's no information about that.
Right. So we're we're left in suspense, right? We're given basically just like an itinerary, a map. Look at this circle of where they went. They went in this whole route, and there's very little detail given. There are, as you said, the story, the famous idea that they had to carry back the big grape cluster. So that's one thing. And there's another big image that we get. 3 big giants, right? That's the word it says here. They're Achiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, right? The Anakites. So look at the note. Geraldine, you got the Eitz Chaim?
Yes.
Anakites. It's on the top of the line.
Says one of the original people of Canaan before Israel's conquest, known and feared for their size.
Right. The word Anak is a giant. Anakites, sons of the Anakim, and this of course goes back to some mythical stuff that's early in Genesis. We're not going to go there, but they're singled out, right? Of all the things that they saw, we don't know about what kind of cities, what kind of fields, what kind of whatever, but they saw these 3 guys, right? And they're big, like they're big. Right?
Is Goliath of the same people?
Goliath is also a giant, yes, but Goliath is a Philistine. So Philistines actually came, they're coastal peoples.
So he was just an aberration. He wasn't like of this group.
He wasn't from this group. That's mean he was an aberration.
No, I meant like his size. Like do we conceive of all Philistines?
He's not from this mythological oversized people. He's not from the Maasai.
I'm also curious, like they're just kind of sent out there. What was their cover story? Were there any safe houses? I'm assuming not. Like did they just wander in and pretend to be merchants, or what are they?
I think they wore sunglasses, so nobody actually recognized them. Yeah.
But did they just go into the field and go off this big cluster of other people without any permission?
This is how Nathan Hale got killed. Like, this is why he was captured, because there was no planning and no thought to take into how to be a spy at the time.
Who's this? Who?
Am I misremembering his name? Give me liberty. The guy who had regretted he had but one life to live for his country.
African.
Nathan Hale.
That's what I said, Nathan Hale. It was the right name. Okay, so he was sent out without any instructions, covers, safe. It's like a miracle he didn't get caught sooner.
Right.
I feel like this is the same kind of disorganization. You're taking these guys, they used to be slaves. Hey, go into this country and scout it out. Tell us what's going on militarily. Bring us back some fruit. Like how I wish like the Torah went into like how exactly they were instructed to do this, not just what to look for, but like, how do you do this? How do you be a spy? This might be part of the reason why they come back and they're terrified.
I don't see the connection. I mean, I see it. I think it's actually the opposite. It would be very, very interesting to get more of that kind of like detail. But what we have instead is a kind of a miracle story of they're there for 40 days. They never get in trouble. Nobody ever challenges them. They don't come back with a statement that says that, oh, we were almost killed here, or we had to run for our lives here. That we're going to get in the Haftorah. In the Haftorah, we have the second set of spies when Joshua sends spies, and they really do have these kinds of problems, and they have to find cover, and they have to find collaborators and stuff like that. But in this story, it's a miracle story, and that part is part of the irony. It's part of, in the end, why it's such a betrayal, because there's no appreciation of how protected they were. There's no appreciation of how much they were actually being taken care of. When they say, "Oh, are you kidding? God is out to get us."
I love this image of giants eating giant grapes.
Right. Right. Well, it doesn't say that they ate the grapes.
The grapes on the pole. Right. Such an early chalutz image, an early Israel image of right. That procession.
Right. That's the Carmel wine logo, and it's also the post office logo.
Well, it feels very Jack and the Beanstalk, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. One more detail before we go on. there is one city where these giants are. There is one city that's mentioned,
Hebron,
Hebron,
Mhm.
which
right?
is an
Hebron,
important city. Yeah.
which is a crucial city. So first of all, here the editorial comment is curious because it says, you know how old Hebron is? Let me tell you, Egypt, cradle of civilization, ancient, and so on, is this ancient city in Egypt. Hebron is even ancienter, right? It's really old, right?
Mhm.
So it's like remarked, if I got this tourist brochure, for a visitor's brochure for Hebron, and it says this thing. What doesn't it say about Hebron that we know?
That Abraham bought property there.
But it's the
And
burial site. Yeah.
that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah are all buried there, right? So it's curious that the calling card for Hebron here completely, sidesteps the very rooted part of this myth that gives us, as we say to this very day, go talk to the settler extremists in Hebron. Hebron, it's a Jewish city. It's a Jewish city from the time of Abraham, right? And here, none of that is hinted at, unless you know the story and it rings a bell in your own imagination. But in the terms of the text goes off in a different direction altogether.
Maybe that's because these guys don't associate it like they might in their head if they remembered, but they're there for a different reason and it's new to them. They haven't lived here, then it was a lot of generations ago when people were buried there. So they have to reforge those connections. Maybe they didn't come into it automatically with those connections.
So look at the note on the below the line for a different way of looking at this. 22, they went up and came.
They went up and came. Hebrew vaya alu vayavo. The first verb is plural, but the second is singular. This prompted the Talmud to suggest that while the other scouts were gathering economic and military data, Caleb was motivated to visit the tomb of the patriarchs in Hebron. He alone was able to see the land not only as it was at the moment, but at what it had meant and would mean in terms of God's promise to the patriarchs. They went up, they ascended not only geographically, but to a higher spiritual level. No matter where one comes from, going to Israel is referred to as aliyah, going up. Similarly, one is called to the Torah for an aliyah, an ascent to a higher level, whether or not there are steps to the bima.
Okay, so the note wants to have it all ways and both ways and backwards and forwards. But the interesting thing that they noted is the change from plural to singular and saying, you know what, maybe only one of these spies had a sense of Hebron as a place that they should really be connecting to, right? So this is, again, just processing and speculating. What did this mean to them? What was their focus? And of course, in the end, Kalev is a good guy. Kalev is one of the people that says, this is all good. So he's the one person supposedly that is given credit for going. Okay.
And I'm struck that the text has very little, doesn't play the nostalgia note at all.
At all.
It
At
doesn't
all.
say go back here because you're buried, your ancestors are buried there. It doesn't say go back there because Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were there, and the Imahot were there. So it's not that you have family ties over here. It's not that this is really your homeland. It's just that this is the land that you need to conquer.
Well, it is at the very beginning introduced as the land that God is giving us.
But
So,
not because
but all of the correct,
background.
all of this historical background, all of this emotional stuff is completely elided. And when Moses says in verse 17, where we were reading, where we started reading, right? Moses says, go up there into the Negev and on into the hill country. He never says, go to Hebron, put a stone on one of the graves for me, put a little kvittel in, a little note, a little prayer. You do that for me. None of that. It's not there. It's really not there. Okay, so in the little bit of time that we have left, we continue. 843, verse 25.
25.
Yeah.
Okay. At the end of 40 days, they returned from scouting the land. They went straight to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran, and they made their report to them and to the whole community as they showed them the fruit of the land. This is what they told him. We came to the land you sent us to. It does indeed flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who inhabit the country are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the Anakites there. Amalekites dwell in the Negev region. Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites inhabit the hill country, and Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. Okay.
Okay, so what do we make of this?
Who
this
is they, though? Who's speaking?
the spies?
Okay, so
Right,
just,
and in the end, in the end, it will unfold as you know, that this is the majority report,
okay,
right? This is 10 of the 12 spies. We will find out that this is a consensus. I mean, 10 out of 12, you know, we should, you know, every politician would love to, you know, this is, you know, hey, 80%, is that what 10 out of 12 is? I forgot, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's like over 80%, right? An 80% majority believes in this report, signs off on this report.
Well, some of the report is actually useful as far as like who's dwelling where and which people are which. Actually, I think that's a pretty good amount. I know you're not speaking any of their languages. Hopefully Egyptian was like the lingua franca. I still managed to find out quite a bit about who's where and what, you know, and what peoples are doing. So
Yeah,
kudos for that.
and it doesn't sound here like there's anything false that's said, right? And they begin by praising the you know, how lush and fruitful the land is, and how, you know, abundant and big the stuff is. The big word here is ephes, right? That's in verse 28, the first word. It's translated here as however, right? In modern Hebrew, ephes is 0, right? In biblical Hebrew, it means used up, all gone, right? V'afes kesef. It's just all, there's nothing left, right? So that word ephes is a super negative word, right? In other words, basically what they're saying is, if you want to do pros and cons, here are the pros. The land itself got a lot of good stuff, but then when you put the cons next to it, it's all wiped out. There's nothing good left. Why? Because the people are fierce, and the cities are huge and fortified. Well, that happens to be a little bit of an exaggeration. Not all of, you know, that's not quite true, but okay. And we also saw the children of the Anakites. How many did they see? 3. Right. And then we have in verse 29, we have an interesting feature of their report. Amalek dwells in the Negev region. So in the biblical list from earlier times, there's these 7 nations that dwell in Canaan. So we have the Knaani, V'Amori, V'Prizi, V'Girgashi, V'Achivi, V'Achiti, whatever it is. But Amalek is not one of them. Amalek, however, is somebody that they know. All the other peoples, they only know, again, by hearsay. They've never met them. They've been in Egypt all this time. But they know Amalek, don't they? What do they know about Amalek?
They had a conflict with them before.
So that's a very neutral way of saying it.
They're the ones who attacked the train, like the wagon trains and such, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, Amalek was this marauding force that came out of nowhere and decided to attack the Israelites in the desert, close to where they were still in Egypt, and specifically attacked the weak and the defenseless ones. And Amalek is now God's sworn enemy. Right, that's what we had, back in right after we got out of Egypt. That's the story that after the song at the Red Sea. So there, in terms of the way the story is being told, there's the composer who writes the background music for the film. Like this is where like some, there's some heavy crescendo-y, dark stuff being played, right? Because this is what now they're saying, and we will have to encounter Amalek again. God does not want the Israelites to encounter Amalek when they leave Egypt. We go around in a big circle because God says, "Uh-oh, if they encounter those coastal people, they'll hightail it right back into Egypt." Right? And here we have this warning. So we have no time left, but I just want to read the very first words of the next verse.
Caleb hushed the people before Moses and said, "Let us by all means go up, and we shall gain possession of it, for we shall surely overcome it."
Right. So the way the story is being told is very interesting. We don't have a report of what the reaction of the people was to this part of what the spies said. And we don't know actually whether or not this is the end of their first speech, and then they have another speech. But what we have is this very dramatic backhand way of saying the people are in an uproar. Like, if it was inside a courtroom, the judge would be gaveling and banging and saying, quiet, everybody is like, completely, upset now. So it's not like we can make excuses for what's going on in what the truthful report of the spies. The truthful report of the spies has completely touched a nerve in the Israelites' consciousness, and they are totally upset. It's not like divided up. Oh yeah, look, big grapes. I love big grapes. No, nobody's talking about that. So, and this is where Kalev, by what he is reportedly saying, he's the giveaway of what actually is being said by everybody else. And of course, he tries to, stand in the breach, so to speak, to no avail. So this is a little bit of what we get here. We struggle today. I know I'm going over time. We struggle today with how do we filter information? How do we read what people say? How do we hear what people say? The Twitters, the videos, the this and the that. And we can be sophisticated. We can be naive. We can be paranoid. How do you hear what somebody says accurately? And how, when people speak, how upfront are they about what they're saying? So, people today mostly don't stand up and say, I want to suppress the vote of African Americans because I hate them. They mostly don't say that, right? They mostly say, I'm really concerned about the integrity of our democratic system, and voting is really important to preserve democracy. So therefore, preserving the integrity of the system is important, right? They say, so if you just read that, if that was in the Torah, all of us would say, that sounds pretty good. That's really right. However, I would say for myself that it's pretty obvious that it's actually garbage. that there's nothing false about what they're saying. There's nothing actually even wrong with what I'm in favor of an integrity of for the system, but actually it's code for all this horrible stuff. So this is one of the great challenges, and I'm not giving anybody here's the rule of thumb. How can you decide what people are really saying or what they really mean, or so on. But for the Torah here, Kalev is our tool for the Torah saying, don't get misled by these people. This is not a good faith, objective, even-handed report. And of course, the rest of it is the tragedy that ensues. All right, sei gesund and stark to everybody, and to be continued.
Thank you, Yashikoa.